The thief in the night, foretold in the Bible, has come, just like Jesus Christ promised that he would, stealthily arriving, performing his divine work, then leaving without much recognition. That's by the year 1892, when he passed on to heaven again. Even to this day, most people on God's earth are not aware at all of this spiritual earthquake having happened already. He came, he left already, but he did leave you a message. I'll tell you more about his message in a few more slides, but first, some background. The thief in our story is, of course, the returned Christ, the Messiah of the latter days, as foretold by Jesus himself in several verses in the New Testament and foretold in Jewish scripture as well. The specific chapters and verses where the New Testament foretells the return of the Messiah, the second advent of the Messiah, and that he would be like a thief, are listed here. 1 Thessalonians chapter 5 verses 1 and 2, 2 Peter chapter 3 verse 10, the book of Revelation chapter 3 verse 3, and also in chapter 16 verse 15. The first two sources, being from 1 Thessalonians and 2 Peter, are attributed to the Apostle Paul and Simon Peter, respectively. The two asterisked verses from the book of Revelation are where Jesus Christ himself states that he would return like a thief. The book of Revelation was revealed to John of Patmos in visions he had as brought to him by Jesus Christ. A note as we begin. I'll be using the New International Version, acronym NIV, of the Bible. The NIV was published in 1973 with some further minor updates in subsequent years. The NIV Bible is the second most used Bible next to the King James Version. The NIV uses more modern, updated language, which is more understandable from the original King James Version of the Bible, first published in the year 1611, which uses Elizabethan English, which was the early modern English used by Shakespeare too. The main advantage of this updated translation in the NIV Bible is the 360 years of improved understanding of the original Koine Greek language in use at the time of Jesus. And it must be remembered that the English language used in the King James Bible translation did not even exist when the Koine Greek Bible was written or compiled. To translate any language into English, you must need to know the original language inside and out, its idioms used in the area, as well as knowing English, of course. It needs to be remembered that Jesus did not speak any form of English because the English language did not yet exist at all in his time or for hundreds of years thereafter. So the King James Version, English version of the Bible is not sacred in any way. Now back to those verses that we listed earlier. Going through a few of these verses, we can readily see that these references to a thief coming is definitely referring to the appearance of the Messiah of the Second Advent. Of course, Jesus the Christ was the Messiah of the First Advent. Here we see 2 Peter chapter 3 verse 10, and note that the bold print and font color accents and underlining were added by me for emphasis. Quote, "But the day of the Lord will come like a thief." Christ said in the book of Revelation, chapter 3, verse 3, in the vision given to John of Patmos, quote, "Remember therefore what you have received and heard, hold it fast and repent. But if you do not wake up," meaning repent, "I will come like a thief, and you will not know at what time I will come to you." End quote. Note that this verse is in one of the letters that was given to the 7 churches in the book of Revelation, in chapters 2 and 3. This specific verse is part of the 5th letter to the Church of Sardis. And in chapter 16, verse 15 of the book of Revelation, he repeats this, quote, "Look, I come like a thief. Blessed is the one who stays awake and remains clothed, so as not to go naked and be shamefully exposed." End quote. Note that Jesus is speaking here to John of Patmos, giving him the vision John and his scribe recorded as the book of Revelation. And regarding being clothed or wearing garments versus being naked, being clothed means having good attributes in one's character, such as love, sincerity, honesty, trustworthiness, etc. Thus, a good character adorns him like clothing. Being naked means the person has no such good qualities of character. Thus, being naked and be shamefully exposed means that one's lack of good character, perhaps even to the level of being evil, becomes apparent to others. And from 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, verse 2, quote, "Now, brothers and sisters, about times and dates we do not need to write to you, for you know very well that the day of the Lord will come like a thief in the night." This quote leads to the question, what is the day of the Lord? What does that mean? Let's go to Malachi chapter 4, verse 5, quote, "See, I will send the prophet Elijah to you before the great and dreadful day of the Lord comes." End quote. Note that Elijah is expected to come before the arrival of the Messiah, just as John the Baptist was the Elijah figure to the coming of the first advent of the Messiah, known as Jesus Christ. An Elijah figure would arrive to announce the coming of the second advent of the Messiah in the latter days, too. Then in the book of Joel, chapter 2, verse 1, quote, "Blow the trumpet in Zion, sound the alarm on my holy hill. Let all who live in the land tremble, for the day of the Lord is coming." End quote. Again, the day of the Lord is when God sends his divine teacher, the Messiah, into this material world to guide us. Thus, this day of the Lord is when the thief in the night will appear, meaning the thief in the night is the Messiah. Now, why would this language be used, which is equating the Messiah with a thief? Why would the Messiah be stealthy and sneaky, which is what calling him a thief infers, of course? Well, a thief uses darkness to obscure his arrival and movements. The thief uses the inattention of household members, whether they are sleeping, busy with other things, or absent from the premises, in order to avoid discovery. The intent of the thief is not to be discovered and interrupted before his plan is set up to be accomplished. To explain, usually God sends his messengers or prophets, also known as manifestations of God, during a time or to a place where the people are in spiritual darkness, meaning a time of spiritual oppression, most often due to the society at large not abiding by the laws and teachings of past prophets. So saying the Messiah will be like a thief in the night, night means darkness, but the darkness here is spiritual in nature. The Messiah appears without much notice or recognition of his true nature, save for a few pure souls who do recognize his divine identity and station. The outward appearance of the Messiah will fool those who are not spiritually aware, who cannot perceive the signs of the times, those who have eyes to see but do not see, and ears to hear but do not hear, and thus they will not detect his divine identity. Widespread recognition of the Messiah and his teachings is delayed, sometimes for hundreds of years after his presence in our material world. God knows us better than we know ourselves. Thus he knows in advance the spiritual darkness he is sending his prophet into. Then the Messiah uses his relative anonymity at the beginning to set up his revelation and dispensation. It's all in the Messiah's plan. Jesus foretelling his own return as a thief in the night was not a new thing, not a new formula for a story of how God works. Jesus himself appeared as a thief in the night too. Think about it. Jesus appeared at a time of spiritual darkness, just like he foretold would happen when he returns. The divine nature of Jesus Christ was recognized only by a relatively few people while he was on earth. But his appearance, teachings, and events around him were set in motion during the time he was physically here. Then his disciples spread his faith after his physical death, which was his plan to set up the establishment and spread of his faith. Note that Christianity was considered to be a small cult until Emperor Constantine promoted the Edict of Milan in the year 313 AD, which officially recognized the religion of Christianity for the first time and allowed Christians to practice their faith. Thus, as I said, Jesus was a thief in the night too. Remember, the Bible also says that when the Messiah comes, that it will be as it was in the days of Noah, meaning that people will not be paying attention. They will be wrapped up in worldly pursuits and paying no mind to recognizing someone as the possible Messiah returned. This is clearly stated by Jesus himself in Matthew chapter 24, verses 37 and 38, seen here. Quote, "As it was in the days of Noah, so it will be at the coming of the Son of Man. For in the days before the flood, people were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, up to the day Noah entered the ark." End quote. These verses tell us that the Messiah is coming, that the return of Christ in the latter days will occur with few knowing of or recognizing his presence. This presents a quandary to us. Will the returned Messiah sneak into the world like a thief as promised in those verses we reviewed? Or will he literally come down from the clouds of heaven for all to see, as other Bible verses foretell? He really can't do both, at least not if you're interpreting these two prophecies literally. Literal interpretation of Bible prophecy verses means you expect their fulfillment to be accomplished materially as written with no symbolic fulfillment. So it's either or. Can't be both. How could the return of the Messiah be both stealthy like a thief in the night and his coming be coming down on a literal cloud for all to see, as you see here? Or from other verses, how could the returned Christ be both a stealthy thief in the night and also be a warrior leading an army from heaven against his enemies, per chapter 19 of the book of Revelation, depicted here on the right, and conjectured from portions of the book of Jeremiah and Ezekiel too? How could the return of the Messiah be both stealthy like a thief in the night and his coming be as a super warrior brandishing a sword with an army from heaven to do battle on earth? Then there's that other scenario of Jesus coming down from the sky and his true followers being lifted up off the earth and going off into the sky to meet him there. That scenario comes from a literal interpretation of 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, verse 17 that you see here on the right. Quote, "After that, we who are still alive and are left will be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air." End quote. However, if you find a logical, symbolic interpretation of these verses, it could well be that they can all be fulfilled in symbolic or spiritual ways, rather than literal. And that is exactly what really happened. So now we have at least 4 starkly different scenarios of the return of the Messiah. The warrior with the sword coming out of his mouth, engaging in battle with his enemies. The 144,000 good Christians, supposedly, being jettisoned up into the air to meet the returned Jesus in the air. And Jesus coming down from the sky on a cloud with trumpets blaring, according to one verse. And fourth, the silent, stealthy thief in the night. Into this soup of events, we should also consider where the Antichrist fits in. And what about Armageddon? How do these scenarios all fit together? What is the timeline? Which comes first, then second, then third, etc.? Is this the correct timeline of the events of the return of the Messiah, according to all these prophecies? Of course, starting from the left and going to the right. Or is this the correct order of events? Or this? Bible prophecy buffs have spent centuries devising graphic depictions of what would happen when the Messiah returns. Here are some of those graphic illustrations, among many, many others, of these various theories of how the events foretold in the Bible about the appearance of the Messiah of the latter days are supposed to happen, according to these many interpretations by humans of the Bible verses. Don't hurt your eyes or brain trying to read and understand them. There are many versions because there are many, many interpretations of these prophecies. And here are a few more. A lot of effort and time has gone into these theoretical proposals of the fulfillment of Bible prophecies. But none of these theories are relevant any longer, and that is because the Messiah of the Second Advent, the returned Christ Spirit, has already been here on earth and gone. We now know exactly what happened, when he appeared, when it all happened, where it happened, and most importantly and remarkably, who the Elijah figure and Messiah were. All those previous theories and graphics are of no use any longer, as we now know the facts that fulfill Bible prophecies. Some prophecies were fulfilled literally, others symbolically, and a few could be considered to have been fulfilled both symbolically and literally. There's a lot to tell you about this. I'll give you some brief information here, but I've made lots of videos about Bible prophecy fulfillment that cannot be distilled down to one video. I'll give you a smattering of information in this relatively short video with loads of other sources to investigate, including my other videos. If you are a true seeker of truth, you've got a big job ahead of you. After you finish watching this video, please see my other videos on how Bible prophecies on the return of the Messiah have been fulfilled. Go to YouTube, that's the website at the bottom of this slide, www.youtube.com. Then enter my channel name into the search box. My YouTube channel is, shown there, Integral Destiny 9. It's all one word, no spaces between the words and the number 9 at the end. Again, Integral Destiny and the numeral 9. Here's a sample of just a few of my other videos. First, there's the one titled Christ Has Returned, which explains how the time prophecies of the coming or return of the Messiah, the thief in the night, have been fulfilled. The Bible may not have given the day or the hour of his return, but it did give the year in several prophecies. Next, Revelation Revealed, which explains the meaning of the book of Revelation. There are also other videos that elaborate on topics such as the 7 letters to the 7 churches, the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, and the meaning of the number 666. Then there's the video 7th Millennium that explains some Jewish prophecies and how they were fulfilled by this thief in the night. And last there, surprise, surprise, Armageddon has already happened. And I have the details in this video that is titled Armageddon is Over. At this point, I want to fill you in on the organization of the remaining content of this video. I already introduced the prophecy of the thief in the night. That's number 1 in this table of contents, so that's checked off already. In part 2, next, I'll cover who the Forerunner and the Messiah were, or are. I say are, present tense, because although both have passed from this material realm back to their spiritual thrones, their teachings and writings continue to guide us for the next 1,000 years or so into this new era in the spiritual evolution of humankind. So they still are present in this world through their teachings. I'll briefly lay out how they both were the foretold thief in the night. In part 3, I'll review some of their sacred writings and how to access those writings if you wish to investigate further. In part 4, I'll provide some of the basic teachings and laws that they brought to us. Part 5, from their teachings, a new faith was created for humankind. This new faith is a continuation of all the existing major faiths, but is in a new package, so to speak, to emphasize the commencement of a new era and the leaving behind of some outdated human-injected beliefs and systems. It's a new start for humanity, a new covenant with God. The Forerunner, the new Messiah, and their faith are the fulfillment of the past faiths. In part 5, this new faith, its community of members, some of their spiritual practices, and organization will be reviewed. Then in part 6, I'll provide further resources, websites, books, videos, and some music that you can use to learn more about this new faith, the Forerunner, and the new Messiah designed and set up for us. So on to part 2, a review of the Elijah figure, the Forerunner, and the Messiah himself, and how they fulfilled the prophecy of the thief in the night. Now be aware from the outset, the returned Christ's name will not be Jesus. The new Messiah, the new manifestation of God for this new era, will have a new name according to Jesus Christ himself, no less. Remember that the book of Revelation was a vision given to John of Patmos by Jesus Christ himself. In 2 of the 7 letters to the 7 churches, Jesus tells John that when he returns, he will have a new name. First, in chapter 2, verse 17, quote, "Whoever has ears, let them hear what the Spirit says to the churches. To the one who is victorious, I will give some of the hidden manna. I will also give that person a white stone with a new name written on it, known only to the one who receives it." Then in chapter 3, verse 12, quote, "The one who is victorious, I will make a pillar in the temple of my God. Never again will they leave it. I will write on them the name of my God and the name of the city of my God, and the new Jerusalem, which is coming down out of heaven from my God, and I will also write on them my new name." So, if they've been here and gone, who were they? The things we now know will be briefly reviewed. The forerunner of the Messiah, the Elijah figure, was a young man known as the Bab, which in English means the gate or door. The new Messiah, the returned Christ Spirit, as well as the Messiah to the Jews, was known as Baha'u'llah, which in English means the glory of God or the glory of the Lord. So how then do they, the Bab and Baha'u'llah, meet the thief in the night scenario in Bible prophecy? The Bab was born in 1819 Common Era. Common Era simply means the same as AD, by the way. The Bab was born in Shiraz, Persia, now known as Iran. He was killed in July 1850 by order of the Shah, or King of Persia. He was killed because the priests of Shia Islam, the mullahs, felt threatened by the Bab's teachings that he was a manifestation of God, but also the forerunner of what the Bab termed him whom God shall make manifest, meaning the Messiah for the age, who would soon appear. Baha'u'llah was born in 1817 in Tehran, the capital city of Persia. He was of noble birth, his father being a minister in the Shah's government. Baha'u'llah became a disciple of the Bab, then was imprisoned for his beliefs, lost all his material wealth and position in society, and was exiled out of Persia by the Shah. The Bab declared his identity as the manifestation of God and forerunner of him whom God shall make manifest, whose appearance would happen very soon after his own. The Bab declared his mission on May 22, 1844 in Shiraz, Persia. Baha'u'llah declared his identity and mission as the glory of God, or the glory of the Lord of hosts, on April 22, 1863, outside of Baghdad, in what is now Iraq. But alas, here we are in the year 2021, 177 and 158 years after the Bab and Baha'u'llah, respectively, made their declarations of their divine identities and missions, and most of the people in the world are yet unaware of them and their claims. Thus, obviously, they successfully fulfilled the thief in the night prophecy. They appeared, taught their revelations from God, the Bab for 6 years and Baha'u'llah for 40 years. Then they exited the scene with thousands of followers, their infant faith community. Their devoted followers have, with the divine power brought by the Bab and Baha'u'llah as a foundation, built a thriving but generally little known faith community throughout the world, over 6 million of us at this time. More about this faith community, the Baha'i faith, in part 5 of this video. But it's not just this one Bible prophecy they have fulfilled. The Bab and Baha'u'llah's lives and teachings fulfilled all Bible prophecies that foretell the return of Christ, meaning the coming of the Jewish Messiah of the latter days. Before we get into some background information on the Bab and Baha'u'llah, you need to be aware that there are many verses in the Bible that tell us that God will send 2 manifestations of his will to us in the latter days. And we are in the latter days, by the way. Here's a list of some of these references. I'll be examining each of them more closely after this. Malachi chapter 3 verse 1, Malachi chapter 4 verse 5, Zechariah chapter 4 verse 15, Luke chapter 9 verse 26, and in the book of Revelation the references to the Lamb, who was the Bab, the forerunner, and he who sits on the throne, as it's termed in the book of Revelation, who is Baha'u'llah. Such as in 2 locations in the book of Malachi as follows. In chapter 3 verse 1, quote, I will, number 1, send my messenger who will prepare the way before me. Then suddenly, number 2, the Lord you are seeking will come to his temple. The messenger of the covenant whom you desire will come, says the Lord Almighty. End quote. Note, of course, I've added the 1 and the 2 in the text to highlight the differentiation in the text of the application of the message there to the first entity to come and then the second entity to come. Then in chapter 4 verse 5 of Malachi, quote, see, I will, number 1, send the prophet Elijah to you before that, number 2, great and dreadful day of the Lord comes, end quote. Note that that great and dreadful day of the Lord specifically means when the Messiah comes. And in Zechariah chapter 4 verse 14, quote, so he said, these are the 2 who are anointed to serve the Lord of all the earth, end quote. Notice that it says the 2 who are anointed to serve. Also notice at the bottom, the note there, it's very important to understand that, and some people don't realize this anymore, the term anointed one is in Hebrew the term Mashiach, which is the term Messiah in English. Anointed one in Greek is Christos, which in English is the word Christ. So Christ means anointed one, Messiah means anointed one, all the same thing. Also in the book of Luke, chapter 9, verse 26, quote, and Jesus is speaking here, by the way, quote, "For whoever is ashamed of me and my words, of him the Son of Man will be ashamed when he comes, number one, first, in his own glory, and number two, second, in his Father's glory, and of the holy angels." End quote. To reiterate, the first clause of that verse states that Christ would return, quote, in his own glory, end quote, who would be the Bob. Then he would return, as the second clause states, quote, in his Father's glory and of the holy angels, end quote, meaning as Baha'u'llah. In the book of Revelation, it also says that there will be two great beings coming. First, the Lamb, and second, he who sits on the throne, in that order. And those two foretold beings were the Bab as the Lamb, and Baha'u'llah as he who sits on the throne, meaning the Messiah of the latter days, the returned Christ Spirit. See my video titled Revelation Revealed to learn more about the hidden meanings and prophecies within the book of Revelation. Remember, my channel name is Integral Destiny 9. Now for a brief history of the 6 years of the Bab's revelation. There is a 1-hour documentary about the life of the Bab. It's available on YouTube for free. I'll be giving information how to access it. It's very well made and it's made by professionals, unlike this video. On May 23, 1844, a young man, later entitled the Bab, which means the gate in English, declared the dawning of a new day in the religious history of the world. His claim was that he was from God to fulfill the prophecies of the past and to foretell the imminent appearance of the Messiah. The young man came from southern Persia, a district called in the Bible the land of Elam. The Bab made his declaration that he was the promised one and also the herald of another manifestation of God he called him whom God shall make manifest, who would arise soon. He declared that he brought a revelation of God, fulfilling Islamic, Christian, and Jewish prophecies of the coming of one of the two prophets to introduce a new era. The Bab stated this second manifestation of God would appear before the passage of 20 years from his own dispensation. The Bab's ministry lasted for 6 years and attracted many thousands of followers. A follower of the Bab is called a Baha'i. The plural of that is Babis. These followers came from a variety of backgrounds: Muslims, Sufis, Zoroastrians, Persian Jews, among others. He had 19 of what were called Letters of the Living, the disciples of the Bab, including one woman, a famed poet named Tahira. A little side note here. The Bible tells us where God will set his throne in the latter days in the book of Jeremiah, chapter 49, verse 37, quote, "And I will set my throne in Elam." That's in southwest Persia or Iran, saith the Lord, end quote. Here are two maps of the Middle East. The one on the left is of the Middle East in ancient times, when Assyria, Babylonia, and Elam existed. The big red arrow is pointing to the location of Elam. It has a yellow background. Note that the black borders are modern ones, not at all the national borders in that time of antiquity, so just ignore them in the map on the left. On the right is a map of modern-day Middle East with the national boundaries. Note that the location of ancient Elam is noted in a small box with yellow background with the green arrow pointing to it. Ancient Elam is now in the southwestern area of modern Iran, formerly known as Persia until 1935. I've enlarged that other map on the right a little bit. Elam is still highlighted in yellow at the center of the map. The red dot in that area of Elam shows the location of the city of Shiraz, Persia, the birthplace of the Bab in 1819. Thus, yes, Elam did indeed play a major part in the beginnings of the appearance of the Messiah of the latter days, very much in keeping with this prophecy of Elam being where God will set his throne in the latter days. Listen to this public declaration made by the Bab, proclaiming to all exactly who he was. Quote, I am, the promised one. I am the one whose name you have for 1,000 years invoked, at whose mention you have risen, whose advent you have longed to witness, and the hour of whose revelation you have prayed God to hasten. Verily I say, it is incumbent upon the peoples of both the East and the West to obey my word and to pledge allegiance to my person. End quote. The Muslim clergy in Persia were incensed by the Bab making this claim. Because the Bab attracted so many devoted followers, the Islamic clergy and governmental rulers felt threatened by him, his teachings, and the huge number of his followers. The response of government officials, especially under pressure from the Muslim clergy, was to remove the Bab to desolate areas away from his followers, but that was not sufficient to quell his energized following. Officials took further measures. In July 1850, the Bab was sentenced to death by the Persian Grand Vizier and King. On July 9th, he and a young devoted follower were suspended on ropes from the wall of this barracks in Tabriz, Persia. Then a regiment of 750 Armenian troops fired upon them. However, when the smoke cleared, the young man was standing alone, and the Bab was not to be found. By the way, this miraculous escape from the first attempt on his life was witnessed by thousands of people and was later reported in newspapers in Europe. After a quick search, the army found him back in his cell, finishing some instructions to an assistant. The youth and the Bab were suspended by ropes once again, and a regiment of Persian troops this time, the Armenian troop leader refused a second attempt, took aim and fired, killing the Bab at noon on July 9th, 1850. Now for the information I promised you about a professionally produced documentary on the life and divine mission of the Bab. It is available for free on YouTube on the channel named The Gate Film, all one word, no spaces, The Gate Film. The link to the video is on the bottom of the screen. You'll have to write it down and type it into your browser on the YouTube site. The title of the documentary is The Gate, Dawn of the Baha'i Faith. Don't worry about the accent marks above the A and the I if you enter the video title in the YouTube search box. Note that you want to search for the full video, not a trailer. It's available in a couple languages as subtitles too. This beautiful building on the slopes of Mount Carmel in Haifa, Israel, overlooking the Bay of Haifa, is the Shrine of the Bab, where the bullet-ridden body of the Bab was laid to rest in 1906. His body had been hidden by his followers in Persia since 1850 when he was killed, then transported to Haifa for burial in the early 1900s. The Bab's body had to be hidden by his Persian followers due to the severe persecution in that country. Next, a very brief history of Baha'u'llah. Baha'u'llah's parents were Mirza Abbas of Nur and Khadija Khanum. Mirza Abbas, also known as Mirza Buzurg, was of royal lineage as a descendant of King Yazdegerd III, the last king of the Sasanian dynasty of kings. Mirza Buzurg was a descendant of Abraham through Abraham's wife Sarah. Khadija, Bezurg's wife, descended through Abraham's wife Keturah. Thus, Baha'u'llah was a descendant of Abraham through two of Abraham's wives, both Sarah and Keturah. By the way, the Bab was a descendant of Abraham through Abraham's wife Hagar. Baha'u'llah's given name was Hussein Ali-i-Nouri, born in Tehran, Persia, on November 12, 1817. He became a follower of the Bab, although he never actually met the Bab. He was considered one of the letters of the living, meaning the disciples of the Bab. His wealth, properties, and social positions were all taken from him by the government due to his belief in the message of the Bab. The Bab and his followers, the Babis, were persecuted severely. The Bab was put to death by order of the Shah of Persia through his vizier on July 9, 1850, as we reviewed before. In August 1852, Baha'u'llah was imprisoned in the Black Pit prison of Tehran. That was where, in a vision, he was told that he was the one that the Bab had foretold would soon appear, the one known as Him whom God shall make manifest, meaning the returned Christ Spirit, the Messiah of the ages and all previous faiths. Baha'u'llah was released from prison in December 1852 and banished as a prisoner to Baghdad out of the nation of Persia. He did not reveal his being the one foretold by the Bab to anyone until April 22, 1863, about 10 years later, just before he was further exiled from Baghdad to Constantinople, now known as Istanbul, by order of the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire. Baha'u'llah was exiled 4 times, first by the Shah, king of Persia, and then 3 times by the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire. All exiles were, of course, as a prisoner. This map of the Middle East shows the exile travels of Baha'u'llah, his family, and some fellow Babis, and the Babis were later called Baha'is if they accepted Baha'u'llah as the one the Bab had foretold was coming. The exiles began in Tehran, more towards the right on the map, and then the exile travels are shown with the red line. Persia is shown in a dark green, and the Ottoman Empire is the area shaded in dark tan. The exile started in Tehran. Baha'u'llah, under guard, traveled through Kermanshah, then to Baghdad. Baha'u'llah resided in Baghdad for about 10 years under the watchful eyes of the governor for that area of the Ottoman Empire. Then Baha'u'llah was further exiled by the Sultan to Constantinople, which is now called Istanbul. And he was exiled principally due to the request by the Persian government to remove Baha'u'llah and the Babis further from Persia. Baha'u'llah left under guard in early May 1863. They traveled overland northwest to the Black Sea port of Samsun, where he, his family, and some companions were boarded onto a steamship to complete the final leg of their journey to Istanbul. They disembarked in Constantinople, Istanbul, on August 16, 1863. After a couple months, the Sultan wanted him and his small group of followers taken further away from the seat of his government, so he exiled them to Adrianople, now called Edirne. Baha'u'llah and his group stayed in Edirne from late 1863 to August 21, 1868, when the Sultan banished him for life to the prison city of Akka, Palestine. So they were boarded under guard of the Ottoman Empire onto a ship in Gallipoli, and after a couple stops along the coast of Egypt, they landed in the small coastal town of Haifa, Palestine, on August 31, 1868. There they were put onto a small sailboat and taken to the sea gate of the walled prison city of Akka. also known as Acre, from maybe you're more familiar with that term, Acre, A-C-R-E. Both Haifa and Akka are now in the nation of Israel. Baha'u'llah spent 40 years writing and teaching his revelation from God before he passed away. He is buried in his shrine outside of Akka. Note that all these exiles of Baha'u'llah were ordered by either the Persian or the Ottoman governments and were not of his own volition. And due to this history of the exiles, and his final exile being to Akka, the world center of the Baha'i faith is located on Mount Carmel in Haifa, Israel. Over the 40 years of his ministry on earth, Baha'u'llah wrote many books and tablets to lay out his plan for the next 1,000 years of God's spiritual kingdom on earth. Some of these books are listed here, but there are others. There's a more complete list that will be at the end of part 3, which is the next section of the video, which is about the sacred writings. Baha'u'llah did not just announce his coming to those around him, but also sent numerous tablets to some kings and rulers, even to a pope, to declare his arrival and his divine identity, and some counsels for them as rulers. Some of those rulers he wrote to were the Shah of Persia, the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire, Tsar Alexander II of Russia, Emperor Napoleon III of France, Kaiser or Emperor Wilhelm of Prussia, Queen Victoria of the United Kingdom, Pope Pius IX, and the rulers of the Americas. This is the beautiful shrine of Baha'u'llah outside of Akka, Israel, the final resting place of Baha'u'llah. I recommend that you watch this professionally produced video on the life of Baha'u'llah and the start of the Baha'i faith as an introduction. You'll have to stop the video and write down this long address, or you can go to YouTube, youtube.com, put the channel name, Baha'i Vision, into the search box, then look for the video titled The Prisoner of Akka. It's about 30 minutes long. If you'd like to find a book that gives a good, interesting overview of the Baha'i faith, its main figures, history, beliefs, and its followers, without being preachy or trying to convert you, this is the book for you. The title is Baha'u'llah and the New Era by J. E. Esselmont. It's available through Amazon.com and probably the other online book vendors too. It may even be in your local library. Those brief histories of the Bab and Baha'u'llah do not really do justice to their lives and accomplishments. Hopefully you'll watch those 2 videos about them to get a fuller picture and even investigate further than that. Now next on to part 3, in which some examples of Baha'u'llah's writings and a few others will be reviewed, and some sources where you can access our sacred and authoritative writings will be given. So on to part 3, a review of the sacred and authoritative writings in the Baha'i faith and how to access them. We'll begin with this quote from Baha'u'llah's book, The Hidden Words, the Arabic section. It's divided into 2 sections, the Persian and the Arabic sections of The Hidden Words, and this is number 33. Quote, O Son of Spirit, with the joyful tidings of light I hail thee, rejoice. To the court of holiness I summon thee. Abide therein that thou mayest live in peace forevermore. And this from the book, Gleanings from the Writings of Baha'u'llah. Quote, Bestir yourselves, O people, in anticipation of the days of divine justice, for the promised hour is now come. Beware lest ye fail to apprehend its import and be accounted among the erring. And another quote from that same book, Gleanings, quote, Beautify your tongues, O people, with truthfulness. and adorn your souls with the ornament of honesty. Beware, O people, that ye deal not treacherously with any one. Be ye the trustees of God amongst his creatures, and the emblems of generosity amidst his people. They that follow their lusts and corrupt inclinations have erred and dissipated their efforts. They indeed are of the lost. Strive, O people, that your eyes may be directed towards the mercy of God, that your hearts may be attuned to his wondrous remembrance, that your souls may rest confidently upon his grace and bounty, that your feet may tread the path of his good pleasure. Such are the counsels which I bequeath to you. Would that ye might follow my counsels. Another quote from Baha'u'llah from his book Tablets of Baha'u'llah. Quote, "In these days truthfulness and sincerity are sorely afflicted in the clutches of falsehood, and justice is tormented by the scourge of injustice. The smoke of corruption hath enveloped the whole world in such wise that naught can be seen in any direction save regiments of soldiers, and nothing is heard from any land but the clashing of swords. We beseech God, the True One, to strengthen the wielders of his power in that which will rehabilitate the world and bring tranquility to the nations." End quote. Naked am I, O my God. Clothe me with the robe of thy tender mercies. I am sore athirst. Give me to drink of the ocean of thy bountiful favor. I am a stranger. Draw me nearer unto the source of thy gifts. I am sick. Sprinkle upon me the healing waters of thy grace. I am a captive. Rid me of my bondage by the power of thy might and through the force of thy will, that I may soar on the wings of detachment towards the loftiest summits of thy creation. Thou verily doest what thou choosest. There is no God but thee, the help in peril, the all-glorious, the unconstrained. This is the day on which the bird of utterance hath warbled its melody upon the branches, in the name of its Lord, the God of mercy. Blessed is the man that hath, on the wings of longing, soared towards God, the Lord of the judgment day. But as they have refused to see with the eyes wherewith God hath endowed them, and desired things other than that which he in his mercy have desired for them, they have strayed far from the retreats of nearness, have been deprived of the living waters of reunion and the wellspring of his grace, and have lain as dead within the shrouds of their own selves. It is our hope that thou wilt hear with attentive ears the things we have mentioned unto thee, that perchance thou mayest turn men away from the things they possess to the things that God possesseth. We entreat God to deliver the light of equity and the sun of justice from the thick clouds of waywardness, and cause them to shine forth upon men. No light can compare with the light of justice, the establishment of order in the world, and the tranquility of the nations depend upon it. That the diverse communions of the earth and the manifold systems of religious belief should never be allowed to foster the feelings of animosity among men is, in this day, of the essence of the faith of God and his religion. These principles and laws, these firmly established and mighty systems, have proceeded from one source and are rays of one light. That they differ one from another is to be attributed to the varying requirements of the ages in which they were promulgated. The next two quotes in this section were written by Abdu'l-Baha, the son of Baha'u'llah. Abdu'l-Baha was very important. He was a main figure in the revelation of Baha'u'llah and in the establishment of his religion, the Baha'i faith. Quote, "O Lord, shower upon them all the outpourings of thy mercy. Rain down upon them all the waters of thy grace. Make them to grow as beauteous plants in the garden of heaven, and from the full and brimming clouds of thy bestowals, and out of the deep pools of thine abounding grace, make thou this garden to flower, and keep it ever green and lustrous, ever fresh and shimmering and fair." End quote. And the second quote from Abdu'l-Baha, quote, "O peoples of the world, the Sun of Truth has risen to illumine the whole earth and to spiritualize the community of man. Laudable are the results and the fruits thereof, abundant the holy evidences deriving from this grace. This is mercy unalloyed and purest bounty. It is light for the world and all its peoples. It is harmony and fellowship and love and solidarity. Indeed, it is compassion and unity and the end of foreignness. It is being at one in complete dignity and freedom with all on earth." End quote. And now a brief run-through of some of the sacred texts of the Baha'i Faith. Some of the books by Baha'u'llah listed here. The Kitab-i-Aqdas at the top, which is the most holy book of laws. The Kitab-i-Igan, in English it means the Book of Certitude. Prayers and Meditations. Then the Epistle to the Son of Wolf. Now the wolf was a man in Persia who, with the wolf's son, were treacherous enemies of the Bab, Baha'u'llah, and their followers. This book was written to that man and his son, surviving son, to ask him to repent for his misdeeds and to correct their misbegotten beliefs about his Baha'u'llah's revelation from God. And the last book there on the bottom, Summons of the Lord of Hosts. Yes, Baha'u'llah is the Lord of Hosts, mentioned in the Bible. To continue, Hidden Words. There is an Arabic version and a Persian version. There are different writings in those two languages. They're not just translations of the same text. Next, the Seven Valleys and the Four Valleys, which is about venturing into a mystical search for spiritual truth. Then the Tabernacle of Unity. Then Tablets of Baha'u'llah. The Call of the Divine Beloved. Gems of Divine Mysteries, Days of Remembrance, and Gleanings from the Writings of Baha'u'llah. That's a collection of his writings. I've listed here just two selections for the Bab. The first one is the selections from the writings of the Bab, and the Bayan, which is the holy book of the Babi dispensation. And the Bayan means the exposition in English. Now for some books by Abdu'l-Baha. I've mentioned him before. He's the son of Baha'u'llah and named by him to be the exemplar of the faith and also called the center of Baha'u'llah's covenant. Now the top book there, called Some Answered Questions, I highly recommend it for Christians since it directly answers some common questions they have about Baha'i teachings on various topics, including the meanings of some prophecies in the Old and New Testaments. Then there's the book, The Secret of Divine Civilization. Oh, and I missed the one, Selections from the Writings of Abdu'l-Baha. Then to continue, The Promulgation of Universal Peace, and Tablets of the Divine Plan, Paris Talks, Tablets to the Hague, and the Will and Testament of Abdu'l-Baha, which actually helped set up the foundations of the Baha'i Faith. In addition to the sacred texts giving us guidance, there are those by Shoghi Effendi, the guardian of the faith from 1921 through his death in 1957, and those by the Universal House of Justice, acronym UHJ. The UHJ is the supreme governing body of the Baha'is of the world. They're elected every 5 years. By the way, there is no clergy in the Baha'i faith. Shoghi Effendi was the grandson of Abdu'l-Baha and named by Abdu'l-Baha in his will to be the guardian of the faith from the time of Abdu'l-Baha's death in 1921 until 1957 when Shoghi Effendi passed away. Shoghi Effendi was the grand organizer of the administrative order of the faith and also could be referred to as the project manager for the construction of the Shrine of the Bab and several other holy sites in the faith and the planning of others. Some of his books were The Advent of Divine Justice, God Passes By, Citadel of Faith, The Promised Day Has Come, and the English translation of the Dawnbreakers. The Dawnbreakers is a history of the early revelation by the Bab and his followers. The Universal House of Justice, acronym UHJ, has produced many letters and other publications guiding the worldwide Baha'i community. But there are two publications of special import shown here: the World Peace Statement, subtitled To All the Peoples of the World, published in October 1985. And here's a quote from the substance here in one of the opening paragraphs. Quote, "The great peace towards which people of goodwill throughout the centuries have inclined their hearts, of which seers and poets for countless generations have expressed their vision, and for which from age to age the sacred scriptures of mankind have constantly held the promise, is now at long last within the reach of the nations. For the first time in history it is possible for everyone to view the entire planet, with all its myriad diversified peoples, in one perspective. World peace is not only possible, but inevitable. It is the next stage in the evolution of this planet. In the words of one great thinker, the planetization of mankind." End quote. The second special document is an open letter to the world's religious leaders, published in April of 2002. An excerpt from that letter, I will quote here, quote, "Tragically, organized religion, whose very reason for being entails service to the cause of brotherhood and peace, behaves all too frequently as one of the most formidable obstacles in the path. To cite a particular painful fact, it has long lent its credibility to fanaticism. We," that's the UHJ, "feels a responsibility as the governing council of one of the world's religions to urge earnest consideration of the challenge this poses for religious leadership. Both the issue and the circumstances to which it gives rise require that we speak frankly. We trust that common service to the divine will ensure that what we say will be received in the same spirit of goodwill as it is put forward." End quote. Most of the above and in previous slides can be accessed through the website given at the bottom here, www.bahai, that's bahai.org/library. Well, we can see our progress here. We're finished with part 3. So on to part 4, a brief review of the major teachings and laws of God for this new era brought by the Bab and Baha'u'llah. I'm going to be reviewing individually each of these 9 major teachings of Baha'u'llah. And then afterwards I'll review some of the actual specific laws that govern us Baha'is. To start this list, this review of those 9 basic teachings, we'll start with number 1. There is only one God who sent to us all these messengers or manifestations of his will, including Moses, Krishna, Zoroaster, Buddha, Jesus, Muhammad, and of course the Bab and Baha'u'llah, and, we're told, others to come in the future. God has an unending love for his creation, all of us on earth. And just like a young child begins his or her schooling in kindergarten, then to first grade, then to second grade, etc., his or her teachers at each level may have the same education themselves. The limit of what they're taught is not the teachers, but rather the ability level of the child. What this means is God sends the manifestation of his attributes or prophet with the revelation that is appropriate for a certain people in their place, time, and spiritual capabilities. These prophets or manifestations of God are perfect mirrors that unerringly reflect to those people the divine attributes of God. Here's a rather colorful depiction that God's light shines on all humanity, and he never left any of his creation without divine guidance. And just FYI, to clarify, we Baha'is are not saying that the sun of our solar system is God. The sun in this diagram is symbolic of God. The rays of the sun shine upon us on earth, allegorically similar to how God's spiritual divine light shines upon us. Don't take this too literally here. These manifestations of God, otherwise known as prophets or messengers, are unblemished, sanctified mirrors, and are so described by Baha'u'llah in his book Gleanings from the Writings of Baha'u'llah. Quote, "These sanctified mirrors, these day springs of ancient glory, are, one and all, the exponents on earth of him who is the central orb of the universe, its essence and ultimate purpose. From him proceed their knowledge and power. From him is derived their sovereignty. The beauty of their countenance is but a reflection of his image, and their revelation a sign of his deathless glory. They are the treasuries of divine knowledge and the repositories of celestial wisdom. Through them is transmitted a grace that is infinite, and by them is revealed the light that can never fade. These tabernacles of holiness, these primal mirrors, which reflect the light of unfading glory, are but expressions of him who is the invisible of the invisibles. By the revelation of these gems of divine virtue, all the names and attributes of God, such as knowledge and power, sovereignty and dominion, mercy and wisdom, glory, bounty, and grace, are made manifest." End quote. And here's another quote by Baha'u'llah on the topic of God's prophets that he sends to us for our spiritual education. Quote, "It is clear and evident to thee that all the prophets are the temples of the cause of God, who have appeared clothed in diverse attire. If thou wilt observe with discriminating eyes, thou wilt behold them all abiding in the same tabernacle, soaring in the same heaven, seated upon the same throne, uttering the same speech, and proclaiming the same faith." This illustration will, hopefully, explain the concept of a manifestation or prophet of God being a perfect sanctified mirror. Now this being, the purple one, is a perfect sanctified mirror and is sent by God to all humanity periodically to bring God's message to humanity appropriate for the people, time, and place to which he is sent. Each time this happens, a different human body is the recipient of the Holy Spirit. The material body is not the important part. The Spirit from God is the essential. The purple person depicted here is the prophet or manifestation of God, his material organic body. The symbol of his divine spirit is the oval mirror overlaying his torso. This mirror is a perfect, unblemished mirror that is sanctified, as the description from Baha'u'llah that was read. The beam of yellow light coming from the upper right corner is symbolic of the divine spirit that shines to the manifestation of God, then is reflected out from him to humanity. We humans can only understand God through his messengers. God is too far beyond our ability to see and understand him. Only his messengers can convey his thoughts to us. These perfect sanctified mirrors reflect the attributes of God so perfectly that we may think of them as being the incarnation of God, meaning God himself comes to earth, but that would be incorrect. They are the manifestations of God, not the incarnations of God. Again, God manifests himself through these perfect mirrors, but he does not incarnate himself into human bodies. Major teaching number 2, the oneness of humankind. We are all members of one race, the human race. Baha'u'llah tells us that there is no linkage at all between the color of our skins and the conditions of our souls. God sees and judges us by the conditions of our souls. I'm going to read this fairly lengthy quote from Abdu'l-Baha on the Baha'i view of the races of humanity. This is from a talk he gave that's in a book that's named The Promulgation of Universal Peace. Quote, "Likewise, in the world of minds and souls, fellowship, which is an expression of composition, is conducive to life, whereas discord, which is an expression of decomposition, is the equivalent of death. Without cohesion among the individual elements which compose the body politic, disintegration and decay must inevitably follow and life be extinguished. Ferocious animals have no fellowship. The vultures and tigers are solitary, whereas domestic animals live together in complete harmony. The sheep, black and white, associate without discord. Birds of various species and colors wing their flight and feed together without a trace of enmity or disagreement. Therefore, in the world of humanity, it is wise and seemly that all the individual members should manifest unity and affinity. In the clustered jewels of the races, may the blacks be as sapphires and rubies, and the whites as diamonds and pearls. The composite beauty of humanity will be witnessed in their unity and blending. How glorious the spectacle of real unity among mankind! How conducive to peace, confidence, and happiness if races and nations were unified in fellowship and accord! The prophets of God were sent into the world upon this mission of unity and agreement, that these long separated sheep might flock together. When the sheep separate, they are exposed to danger, but in a flock and under protection of the shepherd, they are safe from the attack of all ferocious enemies. When the racial elements of the American nation unite in actual fellowship and accord, the lights of the oneness of humanity will shine, the day of eternal glory and bliss will dawn, the Spirit of God encompass and the divine favors descend. Under the leadership and training of God, the real shepherd, all will be protected and preserved. He will lead them in green pastures of happiness and sustenance, and they will attain to the real goal of existence. This is the blessing and benefit of unity. This is the outcome of love. This is the sign of the most great peace. This is the star of the oneness of the human world. Consider how blessed this condition will be. I pray for you and ask the confirmation and assistance of God in your behalf." End quote. And this quote from Baha'u'llah's writings, one of my favorites, quote, "Ye are all the leaves of one tree and the drops of one ocean." Teaching number 3, women and men are equal. Male and female are equal in the sight of God and should have equal opportunities on his earth. This quote from Abdu'l-Baha gives a good analogy of this teaching. Quote, "The world of humanity has two wings. One is women and the other men. Not until both wings are equally developed can the bird fly. Should one wing remain weak, flight is impossible. Not until the world of women becomes equal to the world of men in the acquisition of virtues and perfections can success and prosperity be attained as they ought to be. And from another tablet penned by Abdu'l-Baha, quote, "Know thou that the distinction between male and female is an exigency of the physical world, and hath no connection with the spirit. For the spirit and the world of the spirit are sanctified above such exigencies, and wholly beyond the reach of such changes as befall the physical body in the contingent world. In former ages men enjoyed ascendancy over women because bodily might reigned supreme, and the spirit was subject to its dominion. In this radiant age, however, since the power of the spirit hath transcended that of the body and assumed its ascendancy, authority, and dominion over the human world, this physical distinction hath ceased to be of consequence, and as the sway and influence of the spirit have become apparent, women have come to the full equals of men. Today, therefore, there is no respect or circumstance in which a person's sex provideth grounds for the exercise of either discrimination or favor." End quote. Major teaching number 4. The independent investigation of truth is a requirement for all people. There is no clergy, priests, nuns, and the like in the Baha'i faith. Humanity has progressed to a spiritual stage where such mediators between an individual and God are no longer needed. We are the captains of our own spiritual ships, so to speak. We are individually responsible for our own spiritual advancement and must not blindly follow traditions, movements, and the opinions of others. Adults are to educate their children in the writings, spiritual behaviors, praying, and the like, and principles of the Baha'i faith, but it remains for the child to decide for him or herself after the age of 15 whether or when they become a Baha'i. So we must all be spiritual seekers throughout our lives. This is a quote from Baha'u'llah's book, The Book of Certitude, also known as the Kitab-i-Igan, on what characteristics one must have to be called a true seeker, meaning someone endeavoring to independently investigate truth for him or herself. Quote, "When a true seeker determineth to take the step of search in the path leading to the knowledge of the Ancient of Days, he must before all else cleanse and purify his heart, which is the seat of the revelation of the inner mysteries of God, from the obscuring dust of all acquired knowledge, and the illusions of the embodiments of satanic fancy. He must purge his breast, which is the sanctuary of the abiding love of the Beloved, of every defilement, and sanctify his soul from all that pertaineth to water and clay, from all shadowy and ephemeral attachments. He must so cleanse his heart that no remnant of either love or hate may linger therein, lest that love blindly incline him to error, or that hate repel him away from the truth." End quote. Major teaching number 5. We must work diligently to eliminate prejudices of all kinds. Prejudice results in much suffering, wars, destruction, enmity, and is most often based on misinformation or even disinformation. So prejudice is prejudging, and it means to form opinions and may act on those opinions before you actually know the facts. This often results in an us versus them attitude, which sets up interactions with othered groups to be based on untruths and assumptions, often based on what I mentioned, misinformation, disinformation, or just plain old lack of information. To eliminate prejudices, we need to get to know each other and allow for differences, even appreciate those differences. Number 6 on our list of the major teachings of Baha'u'llah is that science and religion are in unity. They agree. Science without religion becomes mundane materialism, and religion without science becomes mere superstition. And if religion weakens so much over time, becoming increasingly divorced from science and fact, thus becoming superstition, materialism grows in influence. Then you end up with malignant materialism, which I personally believe we as a society have come to this malignant materialism in the last several decades. Again, that's just my opinion. This is the stage of materialism that reduces humans to being viewed as mere economic units rather than as individual people with intrinsic worth. And people with the most material wealth or have motives to accrue such wealth, and who also lack moral restraints from taking advantage of people, preying on people, will take advantage of people who don't have wealth or power, which destroys the feelings of community and social cohesiveness. Science and religion are deemed to be the two wings of a bird, that in order for flight, both wings must be strong. Teaching number 7, and this is about economic justice. Baha'u'llah counsels us that we must, as a society, abolish the extremes of poverty and wealth. Cooperation must replace competition as the basis of an organized economic activity. Baha'u'llah's laws accept the rights of private ownership of property and the need for private economic initiative. He calls for establishment of a minimum income level that meets basic human needs. He also calls for progressive taxation to fund the building and maintenance of an ever-advancing civilization. Obviously, the Baha'i community cannot mandate such principles be adopted by their local, state, and national governments or by private companies. Now, there are laws for Baha'is who are owners of businesses that those Baha'is should strive to comply with because they love God and Baha'u'llah. First, they should be honest in their business affairs. They should pay their employees adequate wages so they can live a good life and take care of themselves and their families. Baha'i business owners should provide pensions and a profit-sharing plan for the employees. What then can be the role of other Baha'is who are not business owners? You should know that we also have some laws that tell us we should not get involved in partisan politics. But we can get involved in nonpartisan politics and other actions that we as individuals can do to advocate for equity for all people in all facets of our society. We should advocate for the education of children and youth and those needing additional or replacement education or vocational training. As parents, we must educate our children. That's a Baha'i law too. Each Baha'i should be educated in a trade or profession and should not be idle. Professions and trades should be chosen with the desire to be of service to humanity. And that, of course, is paramount, that we strive to be of service to humanity. Teaching number 8, that an auxiliary international language must be selected by the nations of the earth. And this is to foster understanding between the nations and peoples. Baha'u'llah counsels us that our being able to communicate with all other people on the planet will help bring peace and facilitate business, academic, and interreligious communications. He stated a need for the nations of Earth to consult together and select one language and script to be universally used as an auxiliary language. Auxiliary, that is, not a replacement for languages spoken in those nations, but rather to supplement them. This graphic hopefully illustrates this, so that all the nations here, as an example, have their own languages, but would also teach their people this one's auxiliary language and the script to go with it. So a person in Vietnam would learn Vietnamese as well as this auxiliary language. A person in France would learn French and this auxiliary language, etc., for all the nations and territories on Earth. So, for instance, in the European Union, all these countries have their languages. At this time, some people have to learn 4 or 5 languages. If we have a set auxiliary language for the whole world, then even the people in the European Union would only have to learn their own language and that one auxiliary language, not 4 or 5 languages. And it can even help some countries like India and China, for instance, who have their people speak several languages or dialects. If in that country they would have a single auxiliary language that everyone else on Earth has too, that would facilitate communications within their own country too. But that's for the future and the nations of Earth to decide later. Now for the 9th major teaching of the Baha'i Faith, that Baha'u'llah came with a plan for world peace, just like the Jewish scriptures promised that the Messiah of the latter days would do. The new Messiah, Baha'u'llah, sent out a call to all rulers and kings in tablets he wrote to them. He wrote general tablets to all rulers as well as some tablets to specific rulers. Some of those rulers he wrote to were the Tsar of Russia, the King of Prussia, Queen Victoria of the United Kingdom, Napoleon III, Pope Pius IX, the Shah of Persia, and the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire. Baha'u'llah called on these rulers to make peace with one another and to end their accumulations of military weaponry. Those rulers ignored his counsels. The only one to give an open-handed response was Queen Victoria. Note that Queen Victoria is the only one of those rulers to retain her throne and territories. Many of the rulers in the Middle East at the time of and shortly thereafter lost their crowns too. World War I happened shortly after the passing of Baha'u'llah in 1892. This war caused great changes in almost every nation and its rulers on earth, in keeping with that vision in Daniel chapter 2 of the kings having their kingdoms destroyed in the latter days. Baha'u'llah's counsels to the rulers of the world on how to establish world peace included to establish a world parliament whose members are elected by the nation's citizens and confirmed by their respective governments, and establish a supreme tribunal whose judgments would be binding on the nations even when the parties concerned did not voluntarily agree to submit their case for consideration. Shoghi Effendi, then guardian of the Baha'i Faith, described Baha'u'llah's counsels to the nations to achieve world peace in the preface of Baha'u'llah's book titled The Proclamation of Baha'u'llah. Quote, "The unity of the human race, as envisioned by Baha'u'llah, implies the establishment of a world commonwealth in which all nations, races, creeds, and classes are closely and permanently united, and in which the autonomy of its state members and personal freedom and initiative of the individuals that compose them are definitely and completely safeguarded. This commonwealth must, as far as we can visualize it, consist of a world legislature whose members will, as the trustees of the whole of mankind, ultimately control the entire resources of all the component nations, and will enact such laws as shall be required to regulate the life, satisfy the needs, and adjust the relationships of all races and peoples. A world executive backed by an international force will carry out the decisions arrived at and apply the laws enacted by this world legislature, and will safeguard the organic unity of the whole Commonwealth. A world tribunal will adjudicate and deliver its compulsory and final verdict in all and any disputes that may arise between the various elements constituting this universal system." End quote. You might wonder how Baha'u'llah's plan would fit in with the current United Nations organization. Well, the World Parliament that Baha'u'llah mentioned is similar to the current United Nations. And a little point to clarify here, the UN or World Parliament under Baha'u'llah's plan would be in control of the nations of the planet, not the Baha'is or other religious, political, or business group. It would be a true world parliament, not the Baha'i parliament, nothing like that. Now, the Baha'i International Community, BIC for short, has recommended several improvements to the present-day Charter of the United Nations to try to put some of Baha'u'llah's councils into the organization with the approval of the nations. It wouldn't be mandatory. The nations would have to approve it. And note the BIC is an NGO at the UN at this time. That's a non-governmental organization, NGO. And there are lots of NGOs at the UN. The BIC operates under the auspices of the Baha'i Universal House of Justice, which is the supreme governing body of the worldwide Baha'i community. The recommendations to the UN by the BIC include, but are not limited to, these two recommendations. First, to add a second chamber to the Assembly of Nations, to make it like the United States Congress that has two chambers, the Senate and the House. That second chamber of the UN would contain the elected representatives from all the member nations to balance the politically appointed members in the main assembly. And second, to do away with the Security Council, since currently in the Security Council just one nation can block actions that are needed to enforce peace and other matters in the world. Just one nation can hogtie all their operations. So if you get rid of the Security Council, then it would remain for the Parliament as a whole to make these decisions. Those are a few of the basic spiritual and social teachings of the Baha'i Faith. There are many, many others, virtually an ocean of the Word of God to dive into. But there are also laws to be followed. The Baha'i Faith is not a cult or a club or a mere philosophy. The laws are from God as revealed to Baha'u'llah, and each person who independently chooses to be a Baha'i should strive to obey those laws. I'll briefly run through some of them shortly. You can check out this website mentioned before, www.bahai.org/library, to check out the sacred writings and the Book of Laws, the Kitab-i-Aqdas. One of the books Baha'u'llah wrote to guide humanity for the next 1,000 years is his Book of Laws, the Kitab-i-Aqdas. This is an excerpt from the very beginning of that book. Quote, "Think not that we have revealed unto you a mere code of laws. Nay, rather we have unsealed the choice wine with the fingers of might and power. To this beareth witness that which the pen of revelation hath revealed. Meditate upon this, O men of insight." End quote. There are also some other laws that Baha'is must strive to obey. First, to recite one of the 3 obligatory prayers each day in privacy. We are to fast for the Baha'i month of Allah. Allah means splendor or glory, which is March 2nd through the 20th of each year. That means no food or liquids from sunrise to sunset. And that's for the 19 days of the Baha'i month of Allah. Those under 15 years old, 70 years old and older, nursing mothers, and those performing hard physical labor are excused from the fast. We're also to make a will. That's important because it reduces disruption in a family after someone passes away. And our laws also have made it a requirement that all of us engage in a trade or craft or occupation. And it also raises the engagement in service to humanity through your work to the rank of worship. And you being human, you probably want to know what behaviors are prohibited in our laws. I'm afraid that's just the way we humans think sometimes. God loves us and wants us to behave up to His standards for our own good. God may or may not change the laws with each prophet that He sends to us. Here are some of the prohibitions for this new era. They are not in any particular order of importance. So we Baha'is are prohibited from the following actions: murder, adultery, slavery of any kind. A human is not allowed to own another human. Larceny, stealing, burglary, and the like. Backbiting and gossiping. It is considered as murder of another person's reputation, basically. Also prohibited the use of alcohol and other mind-altering drugs. Now, if you have a medical condition and the only remedy or pain medication is the use of a mind-altering drug, it is permissible to use it under the direction of a physician, but purely for legitimate medical reasons. Now, the reason for this prohibition is that such drugs cloud the mind and thus dull our spiritual perceptions as well. Onward in our list of prohibitions: calumny, bearing false witness, slander, lying, begging, engaging in conflict and contention. Now, you probably know someone who just feels it necessary to argue about everything. They just enjoy creating diversions and dissension. That is what this prohibition is about. Next, proselytizing, forcing our religion on others. We are encouraged to teach our faith, but only to those who want to hear about it. We are not to chase people around, telling people they're going to go to hell or that they're evil if they don't become Baha'is and the like. God is the only one who decides the status of each soul, not us or we humans. Gambling is prohibited, sexual intercourse outside of marriage, homosexual acts. Note, and there are some others. Note that God is concerned with what is good for us, spiritually, materially, and also for society as a whole. These laws are not punitive or capricious, but for the purpose of helping us advance in this world and in the next. Now, you may have noted the sexual behavior prohibitions in the list. Baha'u'llah tells us that the sexual instinct is to be controlled. Sex is not considered evil, although it can be abused with that end result. In regards to homosexuality, Shoghi Effendi explained that, and this is paraphrasing, No matter how fine the love between two people of the same sex, it is wrong to express it in a homosexual act. However, you should note that the Baha'i faith does not revert to Old Testament teachings such as the killing of homosexuals. We are not to be even so much as unkind to homosexuals. No disowning of children or relatives because they're gay. No stating that homosexuals cannot be employed in certain jobs, etc. Note that Jesus never said anything about homosexuality, for or against it. Most Baha'is I know, including me, in the spirit of caring about human rights, believe that such private behavior between consenting adults is none of our individual business. And if a society allows marriage between two people of the same sex, we would see justification for that, human rights. However, there would be no Baha'i marriage service or Baha'i officiating of the wedding. If there are Baha'i bakers around, I think most, if not all of them, would sell them a wedding cake. Baha'is who are found to be engaging in homosexual acts, adultery, or heterosexual acts outside of marriage are subject to losing their voting rights and attendance at feasts until the behaviors end. And only elected institutions can administer any such sanction or punishment. It is not up to individual Baha'is to decide or enforce any sanctions. Note that the prohibitions against backbiting also mean that the individual or individuals involved must not be the subjects of gossip in the community. Also note that people are free to leave the faith, withdraw their membership at any time they wish. I know a couple people who dropped out of the faith for various reasons. I still consider them friends or friendly acquaintances. I don't see them as often as I used to, but that's because they don't attend Baha'i activities, not because of avoidance or shunning of them. With completion of the review of the major teachings and laws, on to looking at the community of the Baha'is in the world. In Part 5, we'll look at the Baha'i faith, the religion set up by the Bab, Baha'u'llah, Abdul-Baha, and Shoghi Effendi. We'll briefly look at the believers, the faith community, and its organization. Again, the thief in the night has brought a new faith to the world, the Baha'i faith. The followers of Baha'u'llah and the Baha'i faith are called Baha'is. Let me explain a bit about the term Baha'i. The word Baha means glory in English. Baha'i means follower of the glory, meaning follower of Baha'u'llah, the glory of God. By the way, the plural of it is Baha'is. The name is new to people, and the apostrophe at the end and the accent marks confuse people. Most often you'll find that in non-Baha'i English publications that there are no accent marks used. And often they don't even put the apostrophe in there either. Who are we? Who are the Baha'is? We Baha'is come from nearly all nationalities and ethnic groups throughout the world. We come in all colors. We come from all faiths or no previous faith at all. So there are former Christians like me, Muslims, Jews, Buddhists, etc., who have become Baha'is. Note that we do not leave our original faith, but rather we find its promised fulfillment in Baha'u'llah and the Baha'i faith. For instance, I, as a former Christian, did not leave Jesus behind, but rather have found Baha'u'llah to be the promised Christ returned, and the person who I believe is the He Jesus referred to in the book of John, chapter 16, verses 13 to 15. Jews who have become Baha'is have realized that Baha'u'llah is the promised Messiah. Muslims who have become Baha'is understand Baha'u'llah to be the promised great announcement, and that he brought the promised resurrection. Note that some Baha'is are second and third generation Baha'is. However, each child must decide for him or herself whether and when they become a Baha'i. I am the first in my family to become a Baha'i and have been a believer for over 50 years. That's over a century. Hard to believe. Children are not automatically assumed to be Baha'i unless and until they individually sign up, so to speak, after the age of 15. There are about 6 million Baha'is throughout the world at this time. Now, I have heard as high as 7 million recently. Accounting is a bit difficult in some parts of the world where the faith is harshly persecuted. Baha'is reside in nearly all the nations on earth. It's the second most widespread religion in the world, second only to Christianity. There's about 170,000 Baha'is in the USA. Because we are so spread out over the face of the globe, there are a lot of localities where there's only a handful of believers. Thus, most Baha'i religious observances are held in Baha'i centers or private homes in thousands of localities. We do have some houses of worship in the world. I'll show you some of these buildings shortly. Here are some examples of gatherings for devotions in several localities in the world. Photo A, top left, shows a devotional being held in London, United Kingdom. Photo B shows a devotional in Austin, Texas. And photo C shows one in Puerto Tejada, Colombia. The Baha'i Faith has its own calendar. It's a solar calendar of 19 months containing 19 days each. Now that accounts for 361 days. Between the last 2 months in the year, there is a 4 or 5 day period called the intercalary days that make up the remainder of the days to make a 365-day year, or 366 days every fourth year as a leap year, of course. The first day of each Baha'i month is when the religious observances called feasts are held. That means there's 19 times a year. Obviously, rather than once per week, our society usually thinks of as the Sabbath day. Note that many communities have devotional meetings more frequently than the once per Baha'i month feast. There are several other holy days in the year also, such as the anniversaries of the births of the Bab and Baha'u'llah, the declarations of their missions and identities. July 9th is the commemoration of the martyrdom of the Bab, and several others. The illustration here shows a page from a Baha'i date book, which this one is based on the Gregorian calendar here with the Baha'i dates marked on it, since we live in a world currently based on the Gregorian calendar. It's just easier for us to negotiate the differences in the calendars this way. This date book shows the month of July 2021. The dark blue days show special days. The one with the star on it is July 9th, 2021, and that is the day to commemorate the martyrdom of the Bab. He was killed in 1850. The other two show the first days of the 2 Baha'i months, meaning feast days. They are on July 12th, which is the Feast of Kalimat, which in English means words, as in the Word of God. And the one on July 31st is the Feast of Kamal, which means perfection. Each Baha'i month is named after an attribute of God. The first day of the year in our calendar, our New Year's Day, is either March 21st or March 20th of the Gregorian calendar. That's the spring equinox of the northern hemisphere. What year is it now in the Baha'i calendar? The Gregorian year of 2021, as of March 21st of 2021, is the start of the year 178 BE, or Baha'i era, in the Baha'i faith. You've heard the term feast. What is a feast? It's a spiritual feast or observance. It's not a dinner or potluck. Feast has 3 parts to it. First, the spiritual observance, including readings from the sacred writings and prayers. Then the business portion, which includes reading of correspondence from the national, regional, and local spiritual assemblies, announcements from those bodies, treasurer's report, consultation with the attending Baha'is, and other local business. Then the third section is fellowship, refreshments, and socializing. Small communities usually hold feasts in the homes of the believers. Larger communities may be able to afford to rent or purchase a Baha'i center in which to hold feasts and other events. There are some houses of worship in the world. Some background on our houses of worship. They are also referred to as temples. The word used in the sacred texts in their original languages of Persian or Arabic to refer to Baha'i houses of worship is Mashriq al-Azkar, which in English means the dawning place of the praises or mention of God. We do have several significant houses of worship in the world. Being a new faith with relatively few believers compared to the older faiths of God makes it necessary for us to budget our money and plan well ahead. Up to recently, money for these temples have been dedicated to building what are called continental houses of worship, meaning one mother house of worship for each continent or subcontinent on the planet, as follows. One continental house of worship in Africa, one in Australia, Central America, Europe, India, Asia, that's the Indian subcontinent, North America, Pacific Islands, and South America. And here they are. These 8 continental Mashriq al-Azkars, or houses of worship, or temples, are, starting at the top left, is the house of worship in Kampala, Uganda. To its right is the one outside of Sydney, Australia. Bottom right is the one in Hofheim, Langenhain, Germany. Then the one in Panama City, Panama, in the bottom left. Upper left is the one outside of New Delhi, India. It's often referred to as the Lotus Temple because its design is based on the lotus flower, which is common in India. Upper right is the North American House of Worship just north of Chicago in the city of Wilmette, Illinois. Lower right is the unusual looking House of Worship. It also has had an architecture award to it, the House of Worship outside of Santiago, Chile. Then the one for the Pacific Island nations located in Apia, Samoa. You may have noticed some similarities in the designs of these continental houses of worship, although individually they are very distinct in design. Well, all houses of worship or temples must have the following features. They must have 9 sides. This is symbolic of the fact that these houses of worship are for the whole world, not just members of the Baha'i faith. The number 9 is a mystical number in the Baha'i faith, symbolic of completeness. The temples must have a dome, and they are all to be on a base that is circular. And there are no images or statues allowed inside or out. Now that the continental houses of worship have all been completed, we are embarking on building some smaller houses of worship in some localities in the world. Pictured are 2 of them that have been completed. The one in Battambang, Cambodia is on the left, and the one in Colombia is on the right. There are a couple others in various stages of construction or planning. In Vanuatu, that's a group of islands in the Pacific, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, in Kenya, and Papua New Guinea, and in a province of India. You may be thinking that it's kind of strange for a relatively small faith to spend the time and money to build all these structures. Well, Baha'u'llah himself set the design requirements. Abdu'l-Baha explains the importance of these houses of worship, Mashriq al-Azkars, as follows, quote, "Although to outward seeming the Mashriq al-Azkar is a material structure, yet it hath a spiritual effect. It forges bonds of unity from heart to heart. It is a collective center for men's souls. Every city in which, during the days of the manifestation, a temple was raised up, hath created security and constancy and peace, for such buildings were given over to the perpetual glorification of God, and only in the remembrance of God can the heart find rest. Gracious God, the edifice of the house of worship hath a powerful influence on every phase of life. Experience hath in the East clearly shown this to be a fact. Even if in some small village a house was designated as the Mashriq al-Askar, it produced a marked effect. How much greater would be the impact of one especially raised up." End quote. And again, note that the Baha'i houses of worship are for all the people of all the faiths to enter to pray to God, the same God of all the major faiths of God. Next, I want to describe some of the activities that Baha'is get involved with. Since its inception, members of the faith have advocated and worked for numerous social and scientific improvements, such as, but not limited to, the following: racial equity, equality of women and men, human rights, freedom of worship for all faiths, not just our own, and in the last decade or two, action to stop and mitigate the effects of climate change, and planning for sustainable development. It should be noted that individual Baha'is are asked to not become involved in partisan politics, so many of us are involved in activities to try to improve our society, from small to large endeavors. However, we concentrate on non-partisan solutions or methods. The reason is basically to avoid creating dissension within the Baha'i community that could result from the injection of partisan politics into it. We want to be a religion, not a political party. Then, of course, there's all the daily activities that as we go about our jobs, from being house cleaners, restaurant workers, teachers, nurses, to business owners, physicians, scientists, etc. Baha'u'llah stated that our work, when done in a spirit of service, is equivalent to the worship of God. You may be wondering, if we don't have a clergy, as I mentioned before, how do we organize and get things done? Is it a free-for-all? Well, we are indeed an organized religion, but it is based upon, first of all, the sacred and authoritative texts and teachings of the faith, but these ideas are applied through elected representative bodies on local, regional, national, and international levels. We call this organization the administrative order. Baha'u'llah designed for his faith, for the duration of the revelation of Baha'u'llah, which will be for 1,000 years from his time in the mid to late 1800s. It directs the internal affairs of the believers all across the globe. The administrative order assures the continued organization and advancement of the Baha'i faith for its followers. The basic structure of this administrative order for the worldwide Baha'i community is similar to this pyramid. At the grassroots level, at the bottom of the pyramid, are the local spiritual assemblies, LSA for short. Then in some larger countries, such as the United States, the next level up may be a regional council, which are elected by the members of the LSAs in its region. Regional councils handle concerns that may not need involvement of the National Spiritual Assembly, the next level up in the administrative order. This is to keep a lot of the decision-making as close to the grassroots level as possible to avoid excessive centralization. Then at the top is the supreme governing body of the Baha'i world community, and is called the Universal House of Justice, UHJ for short. A clarification here, because some people mistakenly jump to conclusions when they hear that the Universal House of Justice is the highest level of the governance of the worldwide Baha'i community. They somehow hear instead that the Baha'is are aiming to be the governance of all the nations of the world. That would be very, very incorrect. The Universal House of Justice administers the affairs of the Baha'i faith across the globe. Baha'i administration bodies manage internal affairs of the Baha'i faith, but they do not get involved in political or governing affairs of the governments in which they reside at any level, local, state, national, or international. We're just talking about internal Baha'i affairs here. These governing bodies of the Baha'i faith are all elected with terms of limited duration. The basic voting rules for electing members of the LSAs and NSAs are: there are no nominations, no campaigning, and no advocating for any candidates. All adult members in good standing are eligible to be elected and serve on an LSA or NSA and to vote in the elections. Now, that adult members would be 21 years of age and older. Votes are by secret ballot and in write-in votes only. A simple majority wins. Note that during the pandemic, a mail-in combined with internet voting method was devised rather than in-person voting. Voters are to select people for their spiritual qualities and never to vote for someone because of their personal popularity. And there's not to be any material benefit given out for a person voting a certain way. That's forbidden. And parties and factions are forbidden. At the local grassroots level, the elected administrative body is the local spiritual assembly, acronym LSA for short again. Once a locality has 9 or more adult members, meaning 21 years of age or older, in the Baha'i community, the adults gather annually to elect 9 members to serve on the LSA. The elected members of the LSA serve for 1 year. At the national level, the scale being larger, each country with a significant number of believers in it is divided into electoral units. Each electoral unit holds an annual convention to elect a representative who will attend a national convention. The USA has about 160,000 members and over 150 electoral units. These elected delegates from around the country gather in a convention at the National Center to then elect the 9 members who will serve on the country's National Spiritual Assembly, NSA. They can elect any adult Baha'i in good standing, not just from the delegates at the convention. The election process rules apply as for the LSA elections. The 9 members of the NSA serve for 1 year. Just to make it more real to you, I've included this photo of the 103rd National Convention of the USA held in the year 2011. They were elected by Baha'is throughout the continental USA, and these delegates then elected the 9 members of the National Spiritual Assembly of the Baha'is of the United States, who would then serve for 1 year. And this photo is of the 9 members of the USA's National Spiritual Assembly for a recent year, which I don't recall which year it was. Then every 5 years, the members of the National Spiritual Assemblies from all the nations on earth gather at the World Center to elect the 9 members who will serve on the Universal House of Justice for a term of 5 years. Again, the voting is by secret ballot with no nominations, electioneering, etc. allowed. The photo on the left is of the building on the side of Mount Carmel in Haifa, Israel, which is the seat of the Universal House of Justice. Next, I wanted to talk about symbols in the Baha'i faith. All the major faiths have their own symbols that many here that you see you're familiar with. If you look at this lovely, well done illustration, you'll see many of those symbols. starting with the Christian cross at the top. Then clockwise to the right is the symbol of Hinduism, then Taoism. Then at the 3 o'clock position with the green arrow pointing to it is the 9-pointed star of the Baha'i faith. Then to continue, Buddhism, Jainism, Shintoism, Confucianism, Native spirituality, Judaism's Star of David at the 9 o'clock spot. Then above that, the Sikh faith, and then the crescent moon of Islam. There are actually 3 symbols in the Baha'i faith. The 9-pointed star is one of them, and the 9-pointed star has many versions, as you see here, in jewelry, artwork, building architecture, even cookie cutters, stained glass windows, etc. However, an artist can come up with it, and if it has 9 points on it, it can be used as a Baha'i 9-pointed star. The second symbol is usually referred to as the ringstone symbol, simply because Baha'is frequently have jewelry, especially rings, with this symbol on it. Now this symbol explains it all, truly. It is a symbol for the relationship of God, the Creator, to us, His creation, and all God's manifestations or prophets that He has sent to us over the ages. Note that you can kind of think of this symbol as a kind of a Baha'i version of the Christian Trinity, sort of. I will explain that in the next few slides. Here's some artwork, jewelry, and architectural uses of this ringstone symbol. Now for an explanation of the meaning of the ringstone symbol. I'll begin by explaining the meaning of the 2 stars at both ends of the main symbol. First of all, in case you are wondering, these 2 stars are not occult or witchcraft pentagrams. The Baha'i faith teaches that the occult is a construct of the imagination of humans, and we Baha'is are advised to not waste our time with it. The real meaning of the 2 stars is that they symbolize the persons, the bodily temples of the 2 new manifestations of God for this new era, the Bab and Baha'u'llah. Now that we got that minor symbolic meaning out of the way, we can discuss the more important meaning of this symbol of the relationship of God to us. The red arrow at the top is pointing to a somewhat horizontal line which symbolizes the station and the realm of God, the Creator. And then the green arrow at the bottom is pointing to the bottom, somewhat horizontal line that symbolizes the station and realm of God's creation, all of us humans of all faiths, nationalities, colors and languages, etc. The shorter line between the top and the bottom larger lines, the shorter one highlighted in the green, is symbolic of the station and realm of all the manifestations of God or the prophets that God has sent to humanity to teach us about Him. That includes such divine luminaries as Abraham, Moses, Krishna, Zoroaster, Buddha, Jesus, Muhammad, and of course the Bab and Baha'u'llah. Note that Baha'u'llah said that there will be more manifestations of God in the future, but not before about 800 or so more years from now. This shorter line in the middle there, symbolizing the manifestations of God that He sent to us, is also illustrating the unity of the prophets, which means that they are one. Thus they are all the only way to God. The same divine spirit resides in a different human body or temple when it comes to guide us humans. Now the vertical line that the blue arrow is pointing to, that goes between the realm of God at the top and the realm of His creation, us humans, at the bottom. This vertical line is symbolic of the Holy Spirit that connects us to Him, to God. Notice that it goes through the small line that symbolizes the manifestations of God. That's that one highlighted in green. This means that this is the only way to God. That line shows it goes through those manifestations of God. This is the only way we humans can learn about God. And that's what is meant by it's the only way to God, is through these manifestations of God. The only way we humans can learn about God is through the guidance and teachings brought to us by all the manifestations of God that God periodically sends to us. Again, that's why all these manifestations of God are the only way to God. Then the third symbol in the Baha'i faith is what we refer to as the greatest name. That is the greatest name of God, which is the name Baha, meaning glory or splendor. The full term here in Arabic script is Ya Baha'u'llah, which in English means O glory of the all-glorious, or O glory of glories. Note that the Arabic script is written and read from right to left. English is written and read left to right. So, to be honest with you, a lot of English speakers who first see this symbol will incorrectly read it like it's English. They read it left to right. And they see the word evil. There is no alignment at all between Arabic and English script that would make this true in any sense. Now, if you insist on reading the script like it's English, read it from right to left, like Arabic is actually to be written, and you get the word live. In other words, don't try to put this Arabic script into an English framework. It is a praise of God, for God's sake. I'm wagging my finger at you at this moment. Here are two locations that the greatest name symbol is typically found. At the top of the dome of Baha'i houses of worship. The one on the left is looking up at the dome from inside the temple in Santiago, Chile. The one on the right is at the center of the dome of the Chicago, Illinois temple. You'll also find it in the homes of Baha'is. And here's several examples of some combinations of these three symbols. We have completed parts 1 through 5 of this video. Now on to the last part, number 6. You, as an independent spiritual entity, according to Baha'u'llah, have an obligation to do your own spiritual education, other than what your parents or guardians provided when you were a child or youth. I'll give you a smattering of some websites, videos, books, and even a couple online music selections that may help you find your spiritual bearings in life and guide you to elevated thoughts. The books I'll mention are other than those that were described before in Part 3. And this information is not exhaustive. There's a lot more available. Here are some websites. First one there, www.bahai.org. This is the international official website for those seeking information about the Baha'i Faith, and it has a link in it to the online library of sacred and authoritative texts. Next is Baha'i.us. That's a USA official site for the Baha'is of the United States for seekers who want information about the American Baha'i community. Then we have Baha'i.org/library is the direct access to the sacred and authoritative texts of the faith. Below that is www.bahaibookstore.com is the official online bookstore for the USA. Anyone can purchase books, videos, music, and some other items through this site. And the Baha'is of the United States have a presence on both Facebook and we have our own YouTube channel as well. Both of their pages in these websites goes by the name Baha'is of the United States. At the top is www.bahaiteachings.org. This is a blog site where you can find numerous articles written about subjects touching on the Baha'i faith and its teachings. It's not an official site, but rather is produced by some individual Baha'is. Next is the access address to the YouTube channel of the Wilmette Institute, which is an online Baha'i educational site. They hold webinars and actual online courses, some for free, some at a cost, on a wide spectrum of Baha'i topics. The easiest way to get there is to go to youtube.com, then in the search box put their channel name Wilmette Institute into that search box. Next, we do have a Baha'i World News Service. You can go through that address, https://news.baha'i.org. And if you'd like to see some prayers, Baha'i prayers, you can access them at www.bahaiprayers.org. And this is free access, of course. At the top there, a private company named Special Ideas sells books, music, pamphlets, t-shirts, and much, much more. They also sell interfaith materials through their website, www.bahairesources.com or interfaithresources.com. In the middle there is a link to a video about the life of the Bab and can be accessed through YouTube. So go to youtube.com, insert the name of the video into the search box. The name of the video is The Gate, Dawn of the Baha'i Faith. Or you can go to their channel, which is The Gate Film, one word, with no spaces between the words, The Gate Film. At the bottom, there's a link to a video made about Baha'u'llah titled The Prisoner of Akka, also on YouTube for free. Go to the channel named Baha'i Vision, and you don't worry about any of the accents. You should have the apostrophe in there, BAHA', Vision, but don't worry about the accents over the A or I. Or you can just go to YouTube and enter the name of the video, Prisoner of Akka, into the search box. At the top is the site to see daily devotional programs put on by the USA National Community at 12:30 p.m. Central Time. That would be 1:30 p.m. Eastern Time. And the Zoom meeting ID is given there. Now this was devised during the pandemic, and I'm not sure if they will continue it after the pandemic. I certainly hope so, but you might give it a try. And at the bottom there is information how to get to my other videos on Bible prophecy fulfillment on YouTube. Go to youtube.com, then enter my channel name into the search box. My channel name is there at the bottom, Integral Destiny 9, all one word, no spaces, and don't forget the number 9 at the end there. Integral Destiny 9. And note that my videos are unofficial videos. They're not in any way, any kind of officially made one, purely made by me as a private individual. Now for some books that you might find interesting. The one at the top, Baha'u'llah and the New Era, written by J.E. Esselmont. And again, this may be available through online Baha'i bookstore or BahaiResources.com, or even through other online bookstores like Amazon.com, etc. And heavens, you may even be able to find it or order it through a brick and mortar bookstore too. At the bottom there's Baha'i Basics by Francis Worthington. The ordering code through the Baha'i bookstore, that's BahaiBookstore.com, is as you see it here, capital B, capital B, capital T, and a 2, BBT2, and the price is $15, and you can get an e-version for about $6. Two other books about some other Baha'i-related topics. The one at the top, the book Abraham, One God, Three Wives, Five Religions by Francis Worthington. Ordering information is on the slide. Then there's a new book. I have not read it, but it really sounds interesting. God's Plan for Planet Earth and Your Neighborhood by John S. Hatcher. Now, if you're really interested in how the Baha'u'llah and the Baha'i faith fulfill Bible prophecies of the coming of the Messiah, the returned Christ, here are 4 great books for you. Top is Thief in the Night, The Case of the Missing Millennium. It's a very good book wherein Mr. Sears lays out his quest to investigate the case of the missing millennium. The author, William Sears. Then the book I Shall Come Again by Dr. Hushadar Matla. His book is a well-researched encyclopedia of how Bible prophecies were fulfilled. This is the first book in a trilogy on the topic. The other 2 books in this set are Lord of Lords and King of Kings. But the first in the series, I Shall Come Again, is a great read all by itself. Third, the one titled The Prophecies of Jesus by Michael Sowers, shows how the prophecies in the book of Matthew chapter 24 were fulfilled. And at the bottom is the very interesting book titled The Revelation to St. John by Dr. Alan D. Clark, which provides a full explanation, verse by verse, of the meanings of the book of Revelation. Now that one is out of print, but you might be able to find copies used or maybe even new from online bookstores. The last few slides I'll be talking about some music, including some prayers that are as music that are available and may give you just a little taste of Baha'i music. These are all independent artists, of course. First song here is I Believe by the artists Colby and Awu, with the URL for that specific song given there. That is through YouTube. So you might be able to just go to YouTube and put the title I Believe in there and get to it. Then the lovely video by Ali Yousefi of the song One Tree. Again, the URL is given, or you can go to youtube.com and just enter the name of the song One Tree in it. At the top, the URL to the song Salvation is Created is given. The URL is on the right. It's done by the Baha'i Choir. Then also their song In This Day Baha'u'llah. And the Voices of Baha Choir and their song We Are Soldiers in God's Army. That's also available on YouTube. And some other music may be available through the site Baha'is of the United States. And these 3 songs are also available on YouTube. All of this is for free. The titles of the songs are on the right in a bold print, and the artists on the right. Queen of Carmel, Prayer for Healing and Create in Me a Pure Heart. The last 2 slides here are songs by this artist, Red Grammer. He specializes in music for children. The music is not Baha'i intensive, not directly. They're not preaching on religion or anything. Red Grammer is the artist, and he specializes, as I said, for music for children. He was nominated for a Grammy Award. I'm not sure if he won it or not. He should have won it, in my opinion. The Teaching Peace song gets young children very exuberant and was one of the favorites of children in our community, as were all his songs, actually. And more music by Red Grammer. So here we are. We've gone through all these sections of our tale. Please consider investigating the Baha'i faith and my claims, and the claims of the Bab and Baha'u'llah. Don't just talk to your friends about it, asking what they think. Research and judge for yourself, and please do seek out Baha'is to also get their direct input to discuss the mountain of the Word of God and that the Bab and Baha'u'llah brought to us. For Christians, Jesus said that you would know false prophets by their fruit. He was telling you to investigate, research, know before you judge. And even if you don't pursue seeking right now, please don't forget. The Baha'i faith will be here for a long, long time. Thank you for watching. Please note that this production is not an official production of the Baha'i faith community. It was written, produced, and narrated by me alone. Contact me at that email address if you have any questions. All copyright protections are claimed. Do not change any information, slide, diagram, or narration without my permission. And please do not charge a fee to anyone for viewing this video or any part of it. I do not make any money from these videos. I consider this a service and a gift to my fellow human beings.